What is going on, Headliner Nation? Jake Fantasy Headliners. Hopefully everybody's doing well out there today. We're talking about running backs. We're talking about Week 4 fantasy football starts and sits, and it's been a crazy year, right? I mean, had I sat in this very chair just a couple months ago and said, hey guys, listen, by Week 4, the likes of James Robinson, Rex Burkhead, and Jerick McKinnon, they're all going to be ranked inside the top 17 overall for their position in fantasy points scored through 3 weeks. You guys probably would have never subscribed. You would have left. You would have said I was crazy. Would have thought this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. Well, here we are, the start of Week 4, and those names are currently in the top 17 points scored for the running back position. So kind of take it with a grain of salt, right? I understand there's a lot of people out there getting a little antsy, getting a little impatient. They want some of their guys to score bigger points. Just remember, not every player is going to score 20 points a week. It's just not going to happen. Plus, we've said it numerous times for months. There's no preseason games, right? We've gone through 3 weeks of the season. That's basically like the preseason for a lot of guys. Now we should start to see a little bit of a trend forward with some of the bigger names, so don't give up just yet. Now, before we get into all the matchups here for Week 4, how did we do in Week 3? Another super solid week for the running back position, right? We had a total of 60 running backs that we gave a start or sit designation to in last week's show. Out of those 60 guys who completed their games this past week, 46 of them were correctly given that designation for an accuracy percentage of 77%. Some of our biggest hits, James Robinson, right? Thursday Night Football helped a lot of people out. Darrell Henderson of the Rams. A lot of people want to say, no, this is Malcolm Brown's backfield. Think again. This past weekend, Darrell Henderson made a case for it to be his. And then Jerick McKinnon, right? The writing was on the wall for this one. No Raheem Mostert. You knew he was going to see more volume. Some of the biggest misses? Yeah, no, I was not expecting Rex Burkhead to go out there and just absolutely explode in all things fantasy football. David Montgomery, a huge letdown for David Montgomery and a great matchup for him. And then Mike Davis of the Carolina Panthers. Didn't really know what type of role he was really going to see in his first full game without Christian McCaffrey. Now we know he was a miss for us last week. But before we get into all the matchups here for Week 4 fantasy football, I just want to take a quick second and throw it over to Taylor so he can mention today's sponsor of this video.
What is going on, Headliner Nation? Listen, I just wanted to take a second and thank our sponsors for today's video, Edge Sports. Edge Sports is an incredible tool for detailed analytics, matchup data, predictions. Now, this matchup data is based on 400,000 simulations that Edge Sports runs for each matchup to determine who the winner will be, what the percentages will be, what is the game-winning margin, the total points. They even have these spreads for you for your over-under. They also give detailed post-game reports, power rankings, and multiple weekly articles about some of the key matchups from that past week. As far as subscriptions go, there are multiple options depending on what information you want. You can tailor it to exactly what you need. And best of all, Edge Sports is offering Headliner Nation a huge discount when you use the code Headliners50, and you're going to get 50% off of your purchase, your subscription at edgesports.com. Look, I get it. You're here because you want that competitive edge in fantasy sports, DFS, whatever the case may be. This is an incredible tool that's sure to take your team to victory.
Awesome, Taylor. I appreciate it. Now let's head into the Week 4 matchups. Who should we start? Who should we sit for the running back position? Let's kick it off with the Thursday Night Football game, the epic matchup of the Denver Broncos and New York Jets. I mean, I tried to make it sound exciting. A lot of people not excited for this game. A lot of the key players really not even going to be in uniform for this game, but I mean, there's a chance that Phillip Lindsay returns. Kind of a slim chance. It's a short week, but it's something to pay attention to here as the week goes on. More than anything, we just want the game to be close, right? If the game is close, Melvin Gordon has that opportunity to touch the ball 20 plus times, which he did not have in Week 3. So that's something that we're really kind of rooting for, right? Especially going up against the New York Jets defense, which gives up on average 24 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, which is 7th worst in the NFL. Now, Melvin Gordon's averaging right around 11.8 fantasy points per game and sitting right now at running back 21. With a lot of the injuries and a lot of the other issues that we're going to talk about this week here coming up, he's not a bad start this week on Thursday Night Football. Hopefully, if Phillip Lindsay doesn't play, it just gives him that opportunity for those 20 touches that we're looking for. Now, for the Jets, you got Frank Gore. And Frank Gore is never going to go away. Frank Gore is going to touch the ball. He's got 37 touches over his last 2 games, which isn't bad. The problem, only averaging right around 3.5 yards per carry, and he plays in an offense that doesn't give him very many scoring opportunities. I mean, the Jets are barely inside the red zone. The offense as a whole is horrible. Adam Gase continues to call crazy plays. A lot of their pass-catching options are injured on the outside. it's just not a great scenario, right? Now, the Denver Broncos are going to be without Jarrell Casey there on the defensive front, which helps the running game of the Jets, but it's still the Jets. And I really don't want to trust Frank Gore. This is a last-ditch effort. More than likely, for you, hopefully you're not reliant on starting Frank Gore this week in this Jets offense. But if you're desperate, I don't hate the matchup. I just prefer to sit him. I don't know how we'll ever top that epic Thursday night game, but we'll try here on Sunday with the Baltimore Ravens and football team of Washington. And for the Ravens, this backfield is an absolute nightmare, right? You got Mark Ingram, Gus Edwards, J.K. Dobbins, and they're all involved. Right now, Ingram leads the team in yards and carries, but Edwards is more efficient in the touches that he's getting, and J.K. Dobbins is more active in the passing game than the other two. In fact, he actually saw more overall snaps in Week 3 than the other two guys did also. Now, Washington, they allow right around 18 fantasy points per game, and there's a chance that there's no Chase Young, which really helps out the running game of the Ravens. The problem is, which one of the three is it going to be? I can't start any one of these guys with any confidence here this week. There is just no stability in this backfield where I can say, hey, you know what? At least Mark Ingram is going to go out there and touch the ball 12 to 15 times every single week. I can't say that and actually believe it because they could all be involved. And for that reason, I'm going to try to avoid this backfield if possible. If you have no other options, if you're decimated with injuries, I'll take a stab at Mark Ingram and just keep my fingers crossed. Now, for the football team side of things, maybe a little bit of a surprise that I have Antonio Gibson as a start this week, but he's playing really well. He just needs more touches. He's averaging right around 4.5 yards per carry, has a touchdown in back-to-back weeks, and actually CEH found some success against this Baltimore defense last week through the air. Can they get him more involved through the air this week in Antonio Gibson? I have to think that they saw that on tape. If I saw it and the entire world saw it, I'm sure the football team saw it. They need to get Antonio Gibson the ball more in space and allow him to make things happen. He is by far the most talented back in this backfield, but he is not a must-start by any means. He will be ranked towards the bottom half of my top 30 here out of all the guys that I have listed as a start this week. He's not somebody who I'm overly excited to start. However, the touchdown upside is showing up. If the volume can tick up just a hair, you'll be slightly surprised with the type of production you could get from Antonio Gibson. So as of right now, got him listed as a start. More of a flex option, hopefully, though, here for your team this week. Steelers and Titans up now, and you really need to pay close attention to this one. I'm sure by now you've heard the news come out that the Tennessee Titans have had 3 players and 5 members of their personnel test positive for COVID-19. Now, what does that mean for this week? Well, as of right now, the Tennessee Titans have suspended all team activities until what sounds like about Saturday. If that's the case and they don't come back before then, this game is in danger of being postponed. Could it be postponed till Tuesday maybe? Possibly. It really depends what kind of tests come back and how quickly they come back. And this is really the first test that the NFL has had, right? We knew at some point throughout the year something like this was going to come up and happen. Well, here it is, happening in week 4. How do they handle it? It's something we really need to pay attention to. However, for the matchup itself, because we want to not assume that the game's going to be canceled. We're not going to bank on it. We do need to make sure we have backup plans. We want to make sure that we have somebody on our bench ready to go just in case. But as for this matchup, it's kind of straightforward, right? If you have Derrick Henry and they play, you start Derrick Henry. Now, it's a tough matchup going up against Pittsburgh, who only allows 11.9 fantasy points per game, which is 3rd best in the NFL. But Henry's averaging 27 touches a game, 106 yards per game, and we know that he has that weekly touchdown upside. For the Pittsburgh side of things, James Conner, I mean, you got to start him, right? You kind of already know that. After he came back from that mild ankle sprain, he's looked great. He's had back-to-back games of 100 yards, back-to-back games with a touchdown. Tennessee allows right around 24 fantasy points a game to opposing running backs, and you know that James Conner, as long as he's healthy, is going to be a big part of this offense. That's not what's the question in this game. We're paying super close attention to find out any information that we can. Make sure you stay tuned, because if anything breaks late, we'll post it on our Twitter, we'll post it on the YouTube community tab. Whatever it is, we'll make sure you have that information. Just make sure here early in the week you have a backup plan just in case you may be without James Conner and Derrick Henry this week. Chargers and Bucks now, and week 3 did not go as planned for the Los Angeles Chargers. A great matchup against the Carolina Panthers, and they basically pissed it away. I mean, they didn't capitalize on it whatsoever, outside of maybe Austin Eckler. But could this week be better going up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who allow 20 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs? I mean, Austin Eckler is going to remain a start regardless, right? He's now running back 8 overall, and he had 11 receptions in week 3. I remember a couple weeks ago people saying, hey, yeah, no, he's just not going to be involved in the passing game this year. Yeah, he is. It's Austin Eckler, and that's like one of the best things that he does in his repertoire. I doubt they're just going to totally abandon it, and we saw it this past Sunday. He's also averaging right around 5 yards per carry and saw 72% of the snaps. We love it with Justin Herbert under center. That only raises the ceiling even higher for one Austin Eckler. As for Joshua Kelly, he's going to be kind of game script dependent. If they have a lead, he's going to see more touches. If they don't, we probably won't see a whole lot of them because we'll see a whole lot more Austin Eckler. This week, a matchup against the Bucs, even though they may not have Chris Godwin, have that ability to still put up points in bunches at any given time. So I'm going to go ahead and sit Josh Kelly here this week. As for Tampa Bay, Bruce Arians is basically saying F you and your running back options between Rojo and Leonard Fournette at this point. There's no consistency. There's no commitment. There's no rhyme or reason who's going to be out there at any given time. And that's a problem, right? Because we really can't trust either one of these guys. One week, Leonard Fournette looks great. The next week, Rojo makes a couple runs that makes it look like, man, he could have a solid role in this offense. And then the next week comes out and he's not even involved. It makes it really frustrating to try to figure out who the guy is going to be this week. And it's hard to tell, right? I mean, the Chargers allow 11.6 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. That's second best in the NFL. You take a difficult matchup and put on top of it that you have no idea what type of split each one of these guys is going to get each and every week. It makes it almost impossible to try to figure out who to start. At this point, I would prefer to sit both of them until one of them really, dominates the touches and shows some consistency in this backfield. If that doesn't happen, it's really hard to trust, right? I mean, how do you make that decision? If you're desperate for a running back choice, I still lean Leonard Fournette by a hair. If I have to bank on somebody not screwing up, I'm not going to pick Rojo. You know what I mean? Because he's just proven in the past that he just makes too many mistakes, and Arians just has no commitment to one guy. I prefer to sit both of them here this week in a difficult matchup. If you have to roll the dice, throw in Fournette, close your eyes, don't even watch that game, and just hope that it pays off. Seahawks and Dolphins now in the Week 3 Gator death roll that Chris Carson suffered could affect Week 4. We really need to pay attention to the injury reports of one Chris Carson because if he's limited or missing practice going into the weekend, it may be better off to sit him and start Carlos Hyde. This is one of those names we'll have to talk about this week when we bring on Dr. Ethan Turner, so make sure you stay tuned. But if Chris Carson is healthy, you start him. The guy is running back 10, averaging just over 16 fantasy points per game, and he's going up against the Miami Dolphins. That's what you want in the starting lineup of your fantasy football team. If he does miss, then Carlos Hyde kind of slots into that role and has a pretty safe floor, in my opinion, and would become a start. Now, for Miami, I guess Myles Gaskin is a thing now, right? I mean, in Week 3, he had 27 touches. He saw 75% of the snaps, but only had 3 yards per carry, which is slightly concerning. Now, the volume is there, right? But he's losing touchdowns to Jordan Howard. All Jordan Howard does for this team is come in on the goal line and get the touchdowns. That's just about it. Matt Breida, not really involved. Myles Gaskin's going to get that volume. He's a decent flex play because he does have that ability to be involved in the passing game also. There's worse options out there, right? Now, does he touch the ball 27 times a game if they're losing? Probably not. So that was somewhat game script dependent last week. However, we're chasing volume and we're dealing with so many injuries this week that, yeah, I'll start Myles Gaskin and hope that he can, just approach that 18 to 20 touches here in Week 4. Vikings and Houston up next, and this is another one of those games that we really need to pay attention to very, very closely. You see, the Minnesota Vikings played the Tennessee Titans last week, which means they're shutting things down also until they can get all of their test results back as well. Is this another one of those games that could possibly be postponed? It is. We need to make sure, once again, we have plan Bs in place because if this game doesn't happen, Dalvin Cook and David Johnson are no longer options for this week, so make sure you make preparations for that as of right now. Now, if the game is played, it's pretty straightforward, right? Dalvin Cook is an obvious must-start for anybody who owns him. He's currently running back 3 overall, averaging just over 20 fantasy points per game. For Houston, this is what David Johnson owners have been waiting for, right? An easier matchup. He's had difficult matchups the past 2 weeks against Baltimore and Pittsburgh. Minnesota allows just over 23 fantasy points per game. This one really just depends if this game happens or not. Pay close attention to it. We'll keep you updated because both of these guys should be in your lineup as long as this game is going to be played. Saints and Lions now, and man, I'd love to see the production of one Alvin Kamara. I talked about him a lot this offseason and said, hey, the bounce back is coming, y'all better get ready, and here it is. Now, sure, it helps that Michael Thomas is injured because it only gives Kamara more involvement in the passing game. But in a matchup this week against the Lions, where they give up just about 25 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, is music to my Alvin Kamara ears. He's only averaging right around 10 carries a game, which doesn't sound great, but what is great is he's averaging 9 receptions a game, which is absolutely huge, gives him that safe floor. He's an obvious must start. What about Latavius Murray? He's actually still getting carries on the ground, right? He's had 12 plus carries in 2 out of his last 3 games. He's averaging 4.5 yards per carry over these last 2 weeks. And now, with all the injuries that we're suffering and 2 potential games that could be postponed, he has some flex appeal for those who need it this week. It's a great matchup. And if you're looking for another running back, your third running back, a flex play, whatever it may be, Latavius Murray could be your guy here this week. For Detroit, it's another one of those 3-way splits, right? Adrian Peterson, Kerryon Johnson, DeAndre Swift, all are involved at some point. Now, the Saints only allow right around 18 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, so kind of middle of the road. But who do you trust here? Prior to week 3, I would have said maybe DeAndre Swift just because of his involvement in the passing game. You know, he gave him somewhat of a safe floor. And then they totally walked away from DeAndre Swift here in week 3, and he barely wasn't even involved in the game plan whatsoever. It's another one of those crapshoots. It's one of those backfields that aren't going to produce high numbers anyway. So in a matchup like this, where they're not really going to be a solid production, and I'm having to guess on who to start, I'm just going to avoid them altogether here in week 4. Browns and Cowboys now, this one's about as simple as it gets, right? There's not going to be very many weeks where you have to debate whether you should start or sit Nick Chubb, Zeke Elliott, or Kareem Hunt, right? I mean, more times than not, they're always just going to be a start in your lineup. But what's weird is I haven't heard from any of those guys that said Nick Chubb wasn't any good with Kareem Hunt there. It's weird. I just don't know where they all went. I mean, both of them right now inside the top 12. They're coexisting just like we said that they could this offseason. Nick Chubb, currently running back 6. Kareem Hunt, running back 12. It's a run-first team with a solid offensive line. You're starting both of these guys almost on a weekly basis. Nick Chubb looks great with that early down volume, and Kareem Hunt is providing that spark. Yes, sometimes in the backfield, but also in the passing game, and they feed off of each other. Nick Chubb, still the leader of this backfield, and still an obvious must-start going forward. As for the Dallas Cowboys, of course, you're starting Zeke Elliott, right? Absolutely. I mean, he's currently averaging right around 20 fantasy points per game, and the Cleveland defense is kind of underrated still as of right now. They're only allowing 14.7 fantasy points per game, which is 8th best in the NFL. So they are an underrated defense, but it doesn't matter. You never sit Ezekiel Elliott, no matter who he's playing. That upside is always there. Jags and Bengals, and it's time to get real with Joe Mixon, right? We're going to have some real talk here for a second, and is 2020 a disappointment for Joe Mixon? Yes, 100%, absolutely very disappointing, and we're just as disappointed as you are. Trust me. But to see comments constantly about, oh, he's trash, or he's lazy because he got paid, or he's just not a good running back, why? Because you looked at a box score and saw the final stats, and that's the conclusion you came up with. But until you can figure out the why, you're going to do nothing but sit back and spin your tires and not fix the problem, right? It is what it is now. How do we fix it? What kind of conclusion do we come to? Do we trade him? Do we drop him? Do we continue to start him and be patient? That's what we need to figure out, because sitting back and complaining does absolutely nothing. Trust me, we want to be 100% correct on every player in every game. That's what we strive for, but it can't happen. So now that it didn't with this one guy, what do we do? Well, let's take a look at the situation and try to figure it out. How many people out there expected Joe Burrow to average 50 pass attempts his rookie year? The first 3 games of his career with no preseason, no offseason rookie camp. Not too many people, right? Not a whole lot of people expected 50 pass attempts a game. What about somebody taking the work from him? Nope, he's outsnapped Gio Bernard 52-18. So what about the play calling? If you look at the play calling, majority of the time, he's running between the tackles. Or he's got somebody in his face the second he touches the ball in the backfield. Are they giving him an opportunity to get out in space? Are they involving him in the passing game? No. He's got 9 targets through 3 weeks. All he's doing is running up the middle. That is horrible play calling for one of the most athletic and talented running backs in the NFL to not give him an opportunity to succeed. That's where the problem is at. That's the why, right? So is that going to change going forward? If the Bengals want to win any games, it's going to have to change. They cannot rely on Joe Burrow 50 times a game. We saw it a few times last week, him take some big hits in the pocket because he's just holding onto the ball for so long. If they want to keep that kid healthy, they're going to have to switch things up. So that's something just to pay attention to. With all of the injuries right now in the NFL, with 4 teams possibly not playing this week, how can you not start Joe Mixon still? I mean, I don't know how many other options are out there that are going to be, worse than Joe Mixon at this point. Now, is he going to be a running back 1? Probably not. Should you still start him as a flex play, whatever it may be? Why not? The ceiling is still there. Yes, we've seen majority of the floor so far, but in a matchup going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, which we just saw Myles Gaskin have, success against, why would we still not start Joe Mixon? I get it. It's not ideal. But as of right now, until we can see what this offense changes to try to involve him a little bit more, we need to stay still. If you trade Joe Mixon, you're not getting any value for it at all. So why give it up? Just hold on to him. Hopefully they can turn it around. Last year, a little bit of the same thing, right? He started off slow, ended the season on fire, and carried a lot of people through the fantasy playoffs. So don't give up on people so quick. Yes, it's been a disappointing 3 weeks. But as of right now, given the other options available, unless you have a better option this week, I still have to start Joe Mixon. It just is what it is. For Jacksonville, James Robinson continues to be a great story. Now 3 straight weeks with at least 17 touches. The passing game work, it's there also. I mean, Cincinnati should take, a little bit of the playbook of the Jacksonville Jaguars here because the way they're involving James Robinson is absolutely awesome. Cincinnati allows right around 27 fantasy points per game, which is 5th most to opposing running backs. James Robinson is firmly seated in the start column here this week once again. Colts and Bears now, and no Tariq Cohen for the Chicago Bears should mean a lot more David Montgomery in this backfield. Now, last week, he was basically game scripted out, right? I don't think too many people expected the Bears to get down by 3 scores that quickly, and they really had to abandon the run and just throw the entire second half of that ball game. Hopefully he can be more involved in this passing game going forward, because this is a difficult matchup. The Colts allow just about 13.5 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, which is 6th best in the NFL, but Nick Foles really opens up this passing game. We saw it last week, right? He got Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller, even Jimmy Graham the ball. And if they can continue to do that, that's going to open up running lanes and opportunities all over the place for David Montgomery. He's still going to be a start for me here this week. For Indianapolis, it's still the Jonathan Taylor show, right? Now, he only outsnapped Nyheim Hines 24-20 last week. And honestly, that makes no sense because the week prior to that, in week 2, Hines saw 1 touch. It's just another one of those things that make you scratch your head and really kind of hard to put your finger on why it's happening, right? I mean, Jonathan Taylor's going to be the lead back in this backfield. That's unquestioned. He's going to see the bulk of the touches on a weekly basis, but the usage of Nyheim Hines kind of limits that ceiling at times for Jonathan Taylor. He's still a start. Now, this week, there's going to be no Michael Pittman. We know no Paris Campbell. Maybe a little bit more action for the running backs, absolutely possible. I'm going to start Jonathan Taylor, and until we can see more consistent usage of Nyheim Hines, he's going to remain in the sit column. Cards and Panthers now, and we've had a lot of questions about Kenyon Drake as of late too, but I mean, he's averaging 10 fantasy points per game. He hasn't had less than 18 touches in a game. He's still averaging over 4 yards per carry on the season. And week 3 was a little disappointing, yeah, but who really expected the Detroit Lions to go out there and take the lead against the Arizona Cardinals, who had looked great through a few weeks? And then all of a sudden, they kind of had to abandon the run in Arizona. Now, Drake is outsnapping Chase Edmonds on the season 152-76. So he's still the lead back in this backfield, and we can't expect 20 points a game every game from Kenyon Drake. Remember, the first 2 starts of the season were difficult matchups against a healthy San Francisco at the time, and then an elite front 7 of the Washington football team in week 2. Yep, week 3 was a disappointment, but this is another opportunity for him to come out and have a solid week going up against the Carolina Panthers, who allow on average 32 fantasy points per game. I'm looking for a lot better outcome for Kenyon Drake this week. For Carolina, Mike Davis kind of showed what his role is going to be with no Christian McCaffrey, right? His second straight week with 8 receptions, which is great. That gives him that safer floor that we like to see. Arizona allows right around 22.5 fantasy points per game, so it's not a bad start once again for Mike Davis. Is he going to go out there and be the type of back that is going to rack in 20 carries a week? No, probably not. But the involvement in that short passing game, Teddy checking down to him a lot, and his ability to make defenders miss and try to get that added yardage is what makes him a decent flex play here this week, especially with all the injuries and the threat of those games being postponed. Giants and Rams now, and that New York Giants backfield is gross, right? I mean, it's just, ugh. I mean, you got Wayne Gallman, Dion Lewis, Devonta Freeman, and they're all splitting touches. It's a low-producing backfield in a timeshare. The Rams allow right around 21 fantasy points per game, which isn't bad, but who do you choose in this backfield? Who is it going to be? Is it Devonta Freeman this week? Did they give him an opportunity to get more involved in that playbook and then he gets, more touches this week? Possible. Saquon Barkley struggled behind this offensive line. We saw struggles with all these guys last week behind this offensive line. It's not one of those things that say, hey, just give him a couple weeks and he'll hop in there and totally produce. That's not what we're saying by any means. This is just going to be one of those, hey, if you have no other options, you take a stab at it. But honestly, I'm trying to avoid all of these guys every single week until they can actually have a clear back in this backfield. For the Rams, we said it last week that, hey, it's going to be Darrell Henderson, right? Malcolm Brown dealing with that broken finger. He may be somewhat limited. And boy, was Darrell Henderson a great surprise. 20 carries, 114 yards, and a touchdown against the Buffalo Bills. Don't forget, a very difficult matchup. But here's what's crazy. Malcolm Brown only had 7 carries for 19 yards, but both of those guys, Darrell Henderson and Malcolm Brown, played the exact same number of snaps at 34. I think Darrell Henderson outproduced him with similar usage. I'll take that every single day. Now going against the New York Giants, who allow right around 23 fantasy points per game. For now, I'll fire up Darrell Henderson because he's looked great, he's produced, and as of right now seems to be the lead back in that backfield. Bills and Raiders up next, and no Zach Moss equals more Devin Singletary, and he's going to be my Manscaped must-start here of the week. Love Devin Singletary. Last week we saw 17 touches, 120-plus yards, and he averaged 5.5 yards per carry. Not bad for somebody that you probably drafted as your running back 3 here this year. Yeah, he may be your number 2 now because of injuries or whatever, but he's still putting up solid numbers here on the season. Now, Las Vegas, they allow over 35 fantasy points per game, the most in the NFL to opposing running backs, so there's a good chance that Zach Moss misses once again this week, and if it is, I love me some Devin Singletary, absolutely. Now, for Las Vegas, it's obvious, right? Last week, Josh Jacobs just wasn't 100% healthy. He only played in 35 snaps and had to deal with a negative game script on the week. He still had 19 touches, though, so he's still getting the volume. He just wasn't quite as explosive and couldn't do as much with it here this past week. It's something to pay attention to. We'll talk about him on this week's injury update episode with Dr. Ethan Turner. Make sure you watch that because as long as Josh Jacobs is a full go, he's definitely one of those guys that is a must-start every single week in your fantasy football lineup. As for Devontae Booker, Jalen Richard, not really overly interested unless you're in a super deep league. If you're worried about the Jacobs injury and you want to pick up Devontae Booker, if you have an extra bench spot and you just want to slide him in there just in case, I don't hate that. I just don't think that he takes over that lead back role and gets 20-plus touches a week. If anything were to happen to Josh Jacobs, it'll be more of a split. But just something to pay attention to because if Josh Jacobs is healthy, he's one of the best running backs in football and an obvious must-start. Patriots and Chiefs, and how good did the Kansas City Chiefs look on Monday Night Football? That offense was like borderline unstoppable. Now, CEH's 3.4 yards per carry over his last 2 weeks, somewhat troubling, but the work in the passing game absolutely gives him that safer floor and bumps up his ceiling quite a bit. I do hate that he's still not getting a lot of work around the goal line. Still can't punch it in down, close to the goal line. We saw an underhanded flip pass to a fullback on the goal line instead of something to CEH. That's just something to pay attention to. Yeah, he had an opportunity where Patrick Mahomes tried to hit him in the flat, kind of overthrew him a little bit, but those are the types of things that we need to have on a weekly basis to really, catapult him up higher and keep him, kind of from where he's at right now, which is running back 13. The Patriots allow right around 17 fantasy points per game. So yeah, we're still going to start CEH here this week. Now for New England, damn sexy Rexy. Dude got 3 touchdowns on 13 touches. Now, that's not normal, or is that sustainable for any length of time? But Sony Michel, he actually looked good too. Cam Newton, always going to be a threat in the running game. So I really don't know how you handle this backfield. This has been a question that has plagued mankind for centuries in fantasy football. is which running back is Bill Belichick going to use on a weekly basis? For the longest time, it was like, I can't really trust any of them. We'll just go with James White. With James White not there, whether he plays this week or not still remains to be seen. It just makes a huge question mark in this backfield. Personally, I'm passing on all of these guys because I can't, count on that production from Rex Burkhead weekly, and I can't count on Sony Michel having a few big runs to really give him a solid day either, not with Cam Newton under center. I prefer to pass on all the backs in New England. Eagles and Niners, and man, am I still glad to have Miles Sanders out there still for the Philadelphia Eagles. Now he goes up against the San Francisco 49ers defense, who isn't really feared anymore, right? I mean, a lot of injuries still for the San Francisco 49ers, and Sanders has kind of slid into one of those workhorse roles that we really covet in fantasy football, right? Not a whole lot of them out there, so if you have them, you take advantage of them. He's averaging 22 touches a week, right around 119 yards a game, and putting him right around 15 fantasy points a game also, which makes him an obvious must-start with that type of usage and that type of production. Love it absolutely out there this week once again against the 49ers. On the 49ers side of things, you got Jerick McKinnon, you got Jeff Wilson. Now, yes, some news has come out about Jerick McKinnon and a possible rib injury, but there's no details as of yet. Is it serious? Is he going to miss time? Is he going to be limited? Is he going to play this week? We still don't know. That will be on the injury show later this week also. Now, Jeff Wilson, obviously if McKinnon sits, Jeff Wilson gets a huge bump because this week he was kind of saved by touchdowns, right? This past week, he just didn't look that good. In fact, he only averaged 1.25 yards per carry. He was really saved by those touchdowns. And this Philadelphia Eagles defense allows 18 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. But this one really hinges on the health of Jerick McKinnon. If he's healthy and he's a full go, he's in my lineup. If he's not, Jeff Wilson Jr. gets a huge bump, but I can't rely on those easy walk-in touchdowns to really start Jeff Wilson if Jerick McKinnon is healthy. Just something we need to pay attention to here as the week goes on. Falcons and Packers Monday Night Football, and for Todd Gurley, he is what he is, right? This is kind of why we said all offseason we don't mind it in the third round. As a weekly flex play, as a running back 3, pretty safe and solid, right? 11 fantasy points per game. I do hate to see that he's losing touches to Brian Hill, but he's still touching the ball right around 17 times a game. The Packers allow 29.5 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, which is third most in the NFL. So I'll still fire up Todd Gurley as my weekly flex play, running back 3, whatever it is he is on your team. For Green Bay, you can't sit Aaron Jones, right? I mean, now Atlanta does only allow 17.9 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, but Jones is absolutely dominating this backfield in touches. He's averaging over 6 yards per carry, and we already know on a weekly basis he has that touchdown upside. It's not out of the question for him to go out there and get 1, 2, 3 touchdowns a week, and because of that, in a primetime game on Monday Night Football, I'll fire up Aaron Jones, and I'm looking for a big game. All right, so those are my starts and sits for Week 4 fantasy football for the running back position, but it's going to be a pretty interesting week, right? A few games we need to keep our eyes on, a few injuries that we really need to pay attention to here this week, and we're going to keep you covered all throughout the week. So make sure you hit that subscribe button if that's the information that you're here and looking for. We greatly appreciate the support. Look forward to interacting with you guys all throughout the week and the live show once again Saturday night, which we've had so much fun with over the past few weeks. So thank you once again. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit the like button if you're able to help us out. We greatly appreciate it. Have a great rest of your week, and we'll talk to you later.